So on the weapon comparison series, I've typically tried to find two relatively solid, similar weapons. But what would happen if we took this comparison and we went all the way off the deep end? That's right, we're having the battle of the low tiers here. The Big Swig Roller versus the Splattershot Nova. These are two brand new weapons to Splatoon 3 trying to be supportive options for their class that have ended up fumbling despite various buffs over the past 2 years. But which one is the best of the worst? Let's find out today. Be sure to subscribe if you enjoy, and let's get started. This video is sponsored by Splatoon Stronghold. This is a hub for competitive Splatoon, offering services for both new and old players with a website and Discord full of resources for those looking to get into competitive play. And they've just started the Beginners Academy, a free service to help new players join competitive Splatoon. Season 0 just finished, and signups are open right now for Season 1. You can fill out the form in the description, and if accepted, players will be paired with other players to form a team and be provided with free coaching and a team manager to schedule practices for around a month. At the end of the season, these newly made teams will play each other in their first tournament and be invited to the Academy Showcase to compete for a Sendu badge and the title of Valedictorian of the season. It's a really cool, brand new resource for new players, so if you're interested in trying out competitive Splatoon, I'd recommend it. First off, let's talk about the paint output of these weapons, because both of them are pretty much made to do that. Big Swig Roller's vertical flick is obviously pretty terrible at it, but both its flick and even the roll are pretty solid at it. It does lose a little bit when it comes to ink efficiency, but the insanely wide flick with paint as good as old Dynamo Roller along with that speed is just ridiculous, arguably some of the best in the game. Nova has more painting range though, which paired with the fact that it's already a bit more ink efficient means that it'll have a little bit more uptime compared to Big Swig Roller. However, I still think despite those relevant advantages, the paint gap is way too large for Big Swig Roller, easily giving it the win in this category. Next up is the damage. While both of these weapons are known for their terrible damage, one is mostly an old misconception and the other is actually terrible damage. Splattershot Nova does only 24 damage per shot, and while its fire rate isn't too bad, its horrible spread is going to mean that the weapon doesn't really have a way of getting good DPS anyway. There's barely any advantages here other than the fast fire rate, meaning that you'll likely be able to chip someone for 24 damage really consistently, but even then, there's very few weapons that are going to be able to work off that, since they need to do at least 76 damage. Big Swig's horizontal flick, on the other hand, has gotten quite a large damage increase, from 30 up to 40. And 40 damage on a hitbox this size is honestly pretty good. If you're fighting with anything else nearby capable of doing 60 or more damage, which is much less rare, it's just so easy to get damage on them. And while the vertical flick does have a small hitbox, the range on it is really good, which gives you an option to get that same chip damage at a large range. And unlike something like Dynamo, this flick is actually pretty fast. This category is a clean sweep for the Big Swig Roller. Next up is solo kill power. This is not looking good for the Nova once again. If the stars align and you get good RNG, then yeah, it's not terrible, but if that happens, the opponent's probably pretty close to you, which takes away the range advantage that's supposed to be the point of the weapon. Big Swig's horizontal flick, on the other hand, isn't great at killing by itself, but using two swings back to back on the horizontal flick is still better than anything Nova has, and that's ignoring the vertical flick, which while it does have a terrible hitbox, is actually pretty good at killing, having a little bit more range for its 2-shot and 1-shot than the normal Splat Roller. So it's pretty hard to argue that Nova's going to get an advantage here, considering Big Swig actually does ledge camp to get kills, and Nova wants to avoid fights as much as possible. Next up is mobility. Big Swig actually is built to be decently mobile. Its roll speeds up relatively quickly and moves kinda fast, and its horizontal flick isn't laggy by any means, while its vertical flick gives it a thin paint trail that it can actually use to move in like a mini curling bomb. This actually means it's quite competitive with Nova, and I could even see the argument for it taking the category. However, Nova is a shooter and it is very quick at moving, so it's kind of hard to argue in Swig's favor, because while it definitely does have a decent amount of options, Nova's lack of startup and end lag by comparison just makes it much faster. Next up is the range. Now, this might seem like it's in the bag for Nova, given that it should outrange the horizontal flick of Swig pretty comfortably, right? Well, actually no. They are surprisingly close when it comes to range with the horizontal flick, which means there's not actually that big give it an advantage here, especially given the fact that Roller has a vertical flick for even more range than Nova does, surprisingly taking this category pretty easily. Next up is Area of Effect. This is an unfair category, but it is a big part of Swig's strength given the horizontal flick hitbox, so it'd be unfair not to mention it. I don't think I really need to go into detail how a weapon with AoE has better AoE than a weapon that doesn't, so yeah. Finally, it's time to talk about the weapon kits. First up are the subs. Nova has two pretty solid ones, with Point Sensor and Ink Mine, but neither are really great for Nova. Remember, this weapon has the whole damage and fighting problem, and while Ink Mine can help with that if someone's running at you, it doesn't really give you the ability to threaten anyone else who isn't directly approaching you. However, that's still miles better than Big Swig's sub-weapons. Splash Wall on Roller is a combination that's somehow happened in 3 games, and it's not been great on any of them. It's still better than its other kit, which has a line marker. I guess it has a situational combo for the horizontal flick, but the whole point of me using that is the consistency anyway. Dart doesn't really have any of that. So while I'd say all 4 options aren't great for the weapons they're on, Nova's definitely has a solid advantage. After that is the specials. We have Ink Vacuum, Ink Storm, Jetpack, and Killer Whale 5.1. Once again here, Big Swig Roller is in an unfortunate spot. Ink Vacuum, while having some synergy with Wall at least, I guess, is one of the worst specials in the game right now. And even if it wasn't, taking away your ability to actively support and chip damage for your team oftentimes is more harm than it is helpful. Ink Storm, on the other hand, does get to keep the weapon, and stacks well with its ability to deal a little bit of extra damage and paint though, so maybe that one can hold up. Nova's Killer Whale does seem to be the one most directly addressing Nova's problem. It helps with its damage output. Just a tiny bit of Killer Whale 5.1 allows the 4-shot to kill, and the 4-shot killing is better, but I'd argue Nova's kill time problems is mostly to do with the weapon's spread, not the shots to kill. And unfortunately, this doesn't really help you there. In addition to that, it doesn't help with the paint output at all to help with the strength here. In other words, I don't think it passes Swig's Ink Storm. However, the Anarchy Nova's Inkjet might be a different story. Nova has a ton of gear freedom to run a bunch of charge up and special power-up for its jetpack, making it incredibly solid. This is a tough category to call though, because in solo queue, Inkjet is a lot better, and you could definitely make the argument that with the gear freedom to stack an Inkjet, Nova's Inkjet is probably better than Inkstorm. This also could have the argument for taking away the main weapon. You might notice that this is much less of a downside with Nova than it is for Swig. At the end of the day though, I think the gear freedom it has to spec into its special is gonna give it a slight advantage here in making the jetpack a little bit more valuable. So I'll give this win to Nova. I don't know if there's too much of a lesson for the end of this comparison, but I will say at the bottom end of tier lists, you can often find some hidden gems of main weapons. Kits really do matter a lot, and a lot of times I think when a lower tier weapon gets buffs to make it better that don't directly address the thing keeping it bad, it's easy to overlook how it's been improved. So it's cool to see Big Swig improve over time. Nova, on the other hand, is definitely a little bit better, but it seems like it's still lacking improvements in the area it really needs. Maybe that'll change one day. But for now, Big Swig Roller definitely reigns supreme. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all next time.